Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. So today I will be telling you about definitions and privacy policies, and more specifically, how users interpret or rather misinterpret the technical terms that appear in them. So since it's a talk about definitions, I will definitely be defining some of these terms, such as which technical terms am I talking about, in what sense are we looking at user interpretations, and here is a privacy policy. So if you've been around on the internet, you've probably seen something like this, right? Huge blocks of text with a lot of words that you definitely have read. And you've probably checked a box or 10 that looks something like this, saying you've read and agreed to the terms of service and privacy policy. Or you may have also seen pop-ups that look something like this, right? By using our site, you agreed to our use of cookies as per our privacy policy. And so this kind of pop-up legally implies consent if you continue browsing on, the website. So we have privacy policies. We know that this is the law right now. And since these are legal contracts, we can't just replace them with pretty pictures. And yet we also know these are tedious and difficult to read if you read them. But if we need to have them, perhaps we should look at what the pain points are for these documents. And so a quick overview of related words. As previously hinted at, they are long. We know that people don't read these things. And even if you are trying to read a privacy policy, well, research has found that they are often written at levels that are difficult for the majority of people to understand, or they're linguistically structured in such a way as to be difficult to understand. So even if you are at the reading level of these policies, studies have shown that most people are still only able to answer around half of the comprehension questions regarding these policies. So overall, privacy policies are hard to understand. But why don't people understand them, right? Is it the sentences, is it the wording, or is it the specific terminology, right? And so in our work, we looked at the technical terms specifically that appear in privacy policies rather than the linguistic and structural features. And so this leads to our broad research questions, the first of which is how well users understand the technical terms that appear in privacy policies. And by how well do they understand, we look at whether specific common misconceptions appear. And if there are certain misconceptions and misunderstandings of these terms, well, how does that affect users' comfort with the privacy policies that use these terms? And to follow up on that, well, how does it affect users' self-reported acceptance of privacy policies? How likely do they say they are to accept these policies? And how do we go about this? So I'll give you a brief overview of our methodology before going into details on each of the steps. So since we're looking at privacy policies, we had to read and analyze them. So we did that and we read a bunch of privacy policies and extracted a set of 57 initial technical terms of interest. And from using these terms, we ran a qualitative pilot of 80 people on Amazon Mechanical Turk. So our MTurk workers were always located in the United States and had a 95% plus acceptance rate. From the qualitative pilot, which we used to look at which terms were commonly misunderstood, we ended up with a final set of 22 terms. And so these are the 22 terms we used for our main study of 800 users on Amazon Mechanical Turk. And so the main study looked at our two main lines of inquiry. So definitions, which looked at which misconceptions existed and how commonly, as well as comfort levels. So how comfortable would people be given that there might be misconceptions of these terms. And we had also a follow-up study of 108 users. And this asked about their self-reported acceptance likelihood of policies that use technical or explanatory language. And so let's go into more detail about the privacy policy analysis and how we got our terms. We read the privacy policies of the top 10 English language sites from alexa.com. And from there, we identified 57 terms of interest. So these 57 terms were validated with an automated analysis of over 3,600 English language privacy policies. And so all terms that appeared in our corpus for 500 times also appeared in our pilot study. And so now that we have these terms, it was time to run our pilot study. And our first line of inquiry, so our first research question, was on misconceptions and whether users knew the meaning or general meaning of these terms. So how we did this in our pilot study was, let's take one of our terms, pixel tag, as an example, right? We gave an example sentence for pixel tag, and we asked users to define in a text box what they thought pixel tag was. And so we can look at some of the answers that our respondents gave. And so, well, okay, some people went pixel tag, that's formed of two words, pixel and tag. Tag might mean something about identification. Pixels have something to do with pictures. So one respondent said that pixel tags were the data that identifies the pixel information of the photo, which is incorrect. But they tried, good for them. Others maybe focused more on the word pixel. So maybe they went, okay, so pixels, that has something to do with images. Tags are important. So another response was that pixel tag is a digital file like picture or video, which is once again still rather incorrect. Others got closer. So we had a response that says pixel tags are indicators that show when and where a user has been. So this respondent seems to have known the purpose of pixel tags, but maybe wasn't very clear on the exact mechanism by which they work. But not bad, actually. And still others went, okay, pixel tag. I know what each of these words mean separately, but you put them together and I don't know, which is again, very valid because they recognized that they had no idea what pixel tags were. So again, this is also a very illuminating response. We did the same for the rest of our 57 terms and asked users to define them. And so from there, we ended up from our 57 terms with a set of 22 terms for our main study. So these are terms that either were high frequency, so appeared more than 1,000 times in our corpus, so 10 high frequency terms, along with 10 terms with significant misunderstandings as exhibited by the users in our pilot. And we also had free response questions for PII and personal info to use as our attention check. So now that we have our 22 final terms, it was time for our main study. And so the main study looked at both misconceptions, which we looked at through how well people could define it, as well as comfort levels. So let's talk a bit about definitions. So on the right, you see a question about pixel tags drawn from our main study. And so the definition section asks users to select the correct definitions for the terms from out of multiple choice questions. So the correct answer is highlighted in bold here, and the incorrect answers were drawn from actual answers users gave in the pilot. And so in our main study, this could reveal actual misconceptions exhibited by lay users and see if these misconceptions were commonly held. So how well did people do in our main study? Well, 29% of users said the correct answer, so good for them. 20% of users said, I don't know, which is also super valid, right? Because we wanted to give users that knew they didn't know what a term meant the option to select that rather than randomly guessing, so we could reduce noise. And now, given these numbers with some basic arithmetic, you can see that over half of respondents were incorrect about what pixel tags were. And I also want to point out that they were not only incorrect about what the term meant, but they were also confident enough in their misconception to choose a wrong answer over I don't know. So 51%, that's quite a lot, but it's not surprising given the overall accuracy of responses in our definition questions. So here we have a graph about the distribution of responses for each of our definition questions. And so all the terms are on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, on the bottom, you see the percentage of correct answers to that question, and then the proportion of answers that exhibited a particular misconception, which is marked as incorrect, and then the percentage of users that said, I don't know. So we've already talked about pixel tags Let's look beside it, metadata. How do we read this graph, right? So from here, we can see that around half of users chose the correct definition for metadata, good for them. About 40%, a bit over 40% chose an incorrect answer, and around 10% or a bit less admitted that they didn't know. And so overall, across all of our definitions, we saw that on average, less than 40% of questions were answered correctly per user. Around 11% were answered with I don't know, and over 49% of definition questions in the full survey were answered incorrectly. So this shows that overall, many misconceptions exist, right? And this leads into our next line of inquiry, which is about how these misunderstandings affect users' interaction with and comfort with privacy policies. So in our main survey, after the page that asked users to select the correct definitions of terms, we asked about comfort with policies, including these terms. So each person was shown both a technical version, so with language extracted from privacy policies, and an explanatory version for half of the terms in random order to see if there were differences between the technical and explanatory versions of the same policy. So for example, say if there were 11 terms and we had paired technical and explanatory versions for these terms, there would be 22 questions in total. And the order of all 22 questions would be randomized. So users would not necessarily see the technical and then the explanatory version of the same term one after the other, nor would they know that these were paired. So continuing with our pixel tags example, our technical version of the question asked, how comfortable would you be with something that says, we use pixel tags to collect information? So this uses language drawn from privacy policy. We wrote the explanatory version, and for pixel tags, this says, how comfortable would you be with something that says, we monitor user behaviors across different websites using invisible images and other website elements. And so for each question, users rated their comfort on a Likert scale from very uncomfortable to very comfortable. And even though participants did not know the questions were paired, we did. So we looked at the change in comfort between technical and explanatory versions. And so this is paired data. So we use the paired t-test. And so for example, we could ask for a pixel tag, did comfort generally decrease when the term was explained versus when it wasn't? And then we could use our statistical test to see if there were general trends in changes in comfort between terms that were left in their technified version compared with their explanatory version. So we summed this up in a handy chart for you, right? So on the x-axis, you see the terms. On the y-axis, the mean change in comfort. So negative values indicate a decrease in comfort when terms were explained, whereas positive values indicate more comfort when terms were explained. And of course, we didn't expect the same direction of change for all of our terms. So for metadata, pixel tags, web beacons, and device fingerprinting, we expected comfort to decrease because from our pilot answers, it showed that users didn't understand the extent of data being collected or the actual behavior of these things. On the other hand, for browser storage, local storage, persistent cookies, session cookies, end-to-end encryption, and encryption, we expected an increase in comfort because what we saw from our pilot was that users had misconceptions about the extent of security and privacy protections being offered. So what were the actual results? For the so the red bars show statistically significant differences at the 0.05 level. And so we saw that for the majority of these, comfort did in fact decrease, right? And this makes sense given the misconceptions we saw with pixel tags. Users didn't understand the extent of data being collected or the actual behavior. As for things we expected comfort to increase, we also saw some of these increases. For example, for local storage and browser storage, users mistakenly thought this allowed their information to be stored on remote servers under the control of other principals. And so when it was explained, users had a better understanding of the actual security and privacy protections being offered. Similar to our comfort questions, we also ran a follow-up study wherein instead of comfort levels, we asked users how likely they would be to accept privacy policies using technical versus explanatory terms. And so we saw the same directions of change for self-reported acceptance of privacy policies as we did for comfort. So that means if for a term we saw higher comfort once it was explained, We also saw that people said they were more likely to accept a policy when it was explained, and vice versa for lower comfort and the acceptance likelihood. So what have we seen? Well, we know that there are widespread misconceptions of technical terms from our study, and we've seen also that these misconceptions affect the ways in which users interpret privacy policies and the protections offered or not offered, as might be the case. So what do we do? What now? This kind of legal framework, these blocks of text, these checkboxes, these pop-ups, that's unlikely to go away anytime soon, right? Even though past work has shown that they are hard to read, they are hard to understand, even for the minority of people whose reading level matches the level at which they are written. These are still legal documents, right? And they are hard to read because misunderstandings of specific technical legal terms, which we have explored here, also contribute to this reality of there's a lot of words and I don't know what they mean. So we do understand that keeping these technical terms and privacy policies is still likely necessary because, again, these are legal documents, so they have legal implications. But we've also shown that people's relationships to these terms are complex. Certainly, there are widespread misconceptions of these terms, misunderstandings of these terms, and we've seen that these misunderstandings affect the interpretation of terms and affect the interpretation of these privacy policies and what they do. Because for some terms, knowing what it means increases your comfort because then you understand that protections are provided or less data is collected than you assumed. On the other hand, for other terms, well, knowing more about what they mean decreases your comfort because you otherwise might not have recognized the invasiveness or broad inclusiveness of what data is being collected or that this is actually a tracking method. So this leaves us with concerns that companies, by wording and rewording their privacy policies and other documents using legal and technical terms, can manipulate users in ways that, threaten claims of informed consent. And informed consent underpins privacy policies and the rest of our current privacy regime. Because is it really informed consent when users are basing their choices on misunderstandings of these terms, right? Incoming laws across the country and the world continue to rely on notions of consent, which are underspecified. And research such as this can help us build towards ensuring that people's and society's true valuation of privacy is better reflected in the ways that privacy is handled and defined. And so we hope our work is a step in the direction of being able to pick apart this complex domain and work towards such a future. Thank you.